All right, everybody. Welcome to the Houston Ensemble podcast number 4. Today we have a new special guest. We've got Clint Jurek.
Jurek.
Yeah. Dang, and I was going to ask you how to pronounce that before. Yeah. We've got Clint Jurek from Flying Saucer Farms here in Houston on the podcast. Clint is a choice edible mushroom grower. But obviously, we're going to let him talk about that in a little bit. I just want to start off by how I met Clint and a funny happening that occurred. So we, Jared and I, from episode 1, were at the Urban Harvest Farmers Market. And we're walking around, doing the thing, looking at the booths. And we run to the mushroom booth, and Clint is there selling his mushrooms. And we didn't really look at him initially. Like the face, we just kind of walked up to it, and then our eyes were drawn to the card, and hopefully we'll actually put a picture of the card up on the screen. Our eyes were drawn to the card, and Jared was like, "Oh, LOL, is this an homage to the stoned ape theory, Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory?" And he was like, "No," but he thought it was funny. And then Jared and I kind of looked up, made eye contact with him, and we noticed his shirt. And his shirt was just a giant ape's face. And Jared was like, "Oh, is this the homage to the stoned ape theory?" And he was like, "I don't think you even realized it so much." And he was like, "No." And then I bought some delicious oyster mushrooms. And we left. And I dropped Jared off. And then on my way home, I was driving. And I got to a stoplight. And for some reason, a little color caught my eye. And I looked at the corner, and there was a young, teenage boy reading a book that I had recognized so very well. And that was Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna. Basically, Terence McKenna's thesis on the stoned ape theory. And I rolled down my window because I was just in so much awe and shock. And I was like, man, I just yelled. I was like, "You better keep reading that." And he said he just started it and he's going to. So that's how I met Clint. When I came back to the farmer's market this past Saturday, I didn't even think about it. And then I was like, oh my God, let me tell him that story. And then I asked him if he could come on. So Clint, thanks for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Good to be here.
So
that makes me happy to hear that.
That's just manifesting. That's like one of the most intense synchronicities recently, like the most synchronistic, acausal culmination of very specific things. Because I don't know the last time that I had mentioned, thought about, talked with anybody about the stoned ape theory. That's a pretty niche thing.
Yeah, it is.
I've never seen anybody in person ever reading the book, The Food of the Gods, besides myself, or just seeing it online or hearing people talk about it. And then to see that, you're like, where am I? But anyway, Clint, talk to us about, let's just start off. How'd you get into the mushroom growing business, the choice edible mushroom growing business?
So I had cultivated mushrooms a long time ago, just kind of fooling around, seeing if I could grow them. And, had a good time with that. And moved to Oregon briefly and got into foraging a lot. And when I was out there, I was just impressed by how good, gourmet mushrooms really were. And I knew that I had the skill set. And so when I moved back down here, I kind of had this idea. I was like, oh man, I'm going to basically, try to start growing, gourmet on a level that I could support myself with. And, I kind of built out a little room in this back area and was experimenting with different cultivation techniques. I'd originally kind of tried to use some bucket methods or a lot of these low tech things. And while they work and they're kind of, they're fun to experiment with, you can't really produce at like a commercial scale with those. And so I kind of bit the bullet and decided to go with like a traditional bag production. And kind of set that up, got hit with Harvey. And so that kind of set me back about 9 months. I was about ready to pull the trigger and start attending farmers markets. And we got hit with Harvey, and I had to like basically rebuild our house, and I had lost like my room and like my lab and all that stuff. And so, basically, once I'd finished building out our house from Harvey, I, started producing more and more mushrooms, gave it a little test run at the market, and been growing from there. I grew for a while in like a smaller room that I had built out in this. I have this like back building. It's like it's like a 5 or 6 car garage, and I had built out like a basically 1.5 car space. And after I saw that there was a demand for them, I built out another, like I have a 4 car section that's built out for growing now. So I have a lab, incubation area, and a pretty large fruiting room. I guess it's about like 16 or 18 by 25.
Wow.
So it's I'm a one-man show, so it's more than enough space to keep myself busy like all the time, more busy than I want to be. So
is that your primary income right now?
Yeah, that's all I do right now.
That's all you do right now. And he was saying before the show, you sell to restaurants.
Yeah, I have a couple of things have been weird with COVID stuff and vending to restaurants, but I have a couple of that have remained consistent. So I don't know, like Theodore Rex downtown. They won a couple of awards recently. Caitlin Steets is a really cool chef there. And then, Plowman's up north. I vend with Central City Co-op and Kicking Kombucha. I'd worked a little bit with Nancy's Hustle before COVID. I haven't really, because they shut down completely. And so I hadn't really interacted with them since then. And then I've got a vegan chef buddy that I supply with mushrooms in San Antonio, which was going really well because I could ship them priority and they would get there. But with COVID, it takes literally 7 days for a priority package to make it from here to San Antonio. So that kind of slowed down, but it's whatever.
That's crazy. I'm a huge mushroom fan.
Yeah.
As a vegan person, I feel like it's like a major staple.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
How long have you been vegan?
Coming up on 5 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And
are you vegan, Clint? No. I know that. Can you like mushrooms though? Like why mushrooms? There must be some love that came with that made you want to start mushrooms.
I mean, I've always enjoyed growing things. So I worked in the cannabis industry in California for a number of years, and I found out that for like my mental health and just like general well-being, that being on like a cyclical sort of time frame is really, really good for me because it gives gives a certain order outside of like the normal order that you normally work in. And so I found with like cannabis, there's like, like an 8-week cycle, and there's things that you do. And I feel like as humans, we've kind of lost that whole like cyclical nature. Like, oh, it's harvest time. Oh, it's planting time. There was times that, broke up the year, differentiated one time from another. And I feel like working like hourly jobs, you kind of lose that because you get stuck in this, like, it never ends. The job's never over. And so you're just like constantly there. And for me, that's like wildly depressing because it feels like no progress whatsoever. You're just sort of stuck in this like endless, it's Groundhog Day. It's like, it's this endless, time of that. And so, aside from like, I'm really fascinated with mushrooms and growing them and foraging for them. And so it just seemed like a really good, thing to sort of like hone in on, and that could be like unique. There's not a lot of people like growing mushrooms. Totally. And so it sort of gave me that. And then like on this like other symbolic level, like I really like, to me, mushrooms represent a liminal space, is that you're taking dead things and you're processing them into live things that nourish. So you're taking, this sort of, the detritus of the forest or whatever, and you're converting that, or the dead trees, and you're converting that into nourishing life. And so it kind of rides that edge more clearly. I mean, like everything's living off of like dead things. So it's true of like everything, but on like a really, like, because they're primary decomposers, there's this like, I don't know, I really kind of like them as a symbolic object. And I think that people, like, historically, that's kind of
very true.
Been how people have addressed them. And then on a much deeper level, my initial cultivation of mushrooms, and this was, far outside of the statute of limitations. So I guess about 14 years ago, I was growing psilocybin mushrooms and, kind of just changed my life completely, to be honest. So that they kind of had my heart, and it had my attention. Yeah. And then I try to, like, through my lifestyle, like I can kind of like embody that as like being a liminal person, like working this sort of like, people are like very, especially in American culture, they're very curious about like what mushrooms are, but we don't have a cultural like container for them. It's all toadstools or poison. And so, I can, it in a societal sense, is it like I can play a role of a person that's not an outsider, but a person that there's, I don't know the archetype, but there's a role that you play where you are, you're an outsider with mysterious knowledge. Sure. And it's a really fun way to do that. Yeah. And because I think I'm into like other like far out ideas, it's a fun way to like interact with the world that on a certain level gives me an advantage to talk about the weird stuff that I want to, because the mushroom conversation descends into like all kinds of weirdness. Yeah. I mean, you could go totally straight on and just be like, they're delicious.
It's about to descend there right now. But I also feel like you growing mushrooms and being one of the sources of delicious organic mushrooms in Houston also gives you credibility to talk about these things, because there is a bit of a stigma. Like you said, there is a fascination with mushrooms in America for sure. But I think that for us who are very, like, also very interested in mushrooms, like, and we're talking about it, we all love it, we all think it's delicious and other uses, but we forget sometimes that there's a whole other side of America that can't imagine mushrooms being such like a respected thing in our society. They're like, they don't want it to be, they think it's evil, they think it's from the devil or whatever it is,
poisonous.
Or just poison.
I get shown that every week at the farmer's market, is that people basically come up and they go, ooh, what are those? Like they literally see a lion's mane and they're like, is that like they there's all these things that they think that it might be, and is it a cauliflower? Is it, all this? And even the oysters, because they don't have that typical mushroom shape, people are like, what are these? And I was like, these are both like some of the best tasting mushrooms that are available in the world. And I apologize for everybody cut their teeth on portobellos, and I'm like, guys, you're not living. There's that. So there's that approach, is that there's just total ignorance, or it's associated with like a trope. They'd be like, oh, psychedelics. Like I get asked, I mean, anywhere from like 2 to like 5 times a market, either to will I grow and sell them psychedelic mushrooms, or they want to like crack jokes about it. Or and I mean, that's all fun. Like I kind of enjoy it, but sometimes what's really fun is to be the mushroom guy and be like, oh, I don't know anything about that. Yeah. It's just
glad I didn't.
But no, I mean it's also kind of fun, because it that's their context for it, and it's be like, oh, there's so much more. It's like if you want to read some books or like get into nature, and for me, like I mean, just to kind of continue on this whole thing about like why mushrooms are important to me is, they were for me a big introduction into like nature and like systems, is that for me, like I appreciated nature, but nature wasn't really alive until I started to understand the, inner functioning of like plants and fungi, and like how forests have these like, they're very smart. They function in these like perfect balances. Yeah. And we totally don't understand that. And so for me, like mushrooms was a way to like get in touch with and understand nature. And so, and that was huge for me. Just, because you start relating to the world differently.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that really specifically, just to touch on that for a second. The perfection of nature and the perfection of just the earth, Gaia, whatever you'll call it.
Yeah.
And we need to take example from that, and we need to just try and imitate that to the best of our ability. And I think a really amazing example is the Japanese designing the subway system based on the growth of the mycelium.
Oh, I heard this, yeah.
And basically the researchers they needed to find the most direct pathways or the best pathways. And so they just studied the growth of the mycelium and designed the subway system based on that. And you're like, wow, so it sounds like we should always be taking hints from nature.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a lot of ways, some of the coolest technology that we have or we think about is like mimicking already perfect systems that we want to scale up to, make efficient for us. Yeah. And I mean, mycelium is fascinating. Just the way that it holds everything together. It's this like intermediary.
Yeah. Like fungi, it seems like they're kind of like, I don't know, the mediaries of the wilderness or the forest. Like there can be gigantic mushroom structures underground within a forest. And if there's one tree that's dying somewhere or that just fell somewhere, the fungi activity becomes very high in that location, and it begins to restructure, regrow, and recompose or even decompose those areas and get it back into the soil. So it's like this creature actually has, like, this is gonna sound kind of goofy, but like a consciousness or a mind of its own.
Oh, I mean, I would. You wouldn't take much convincing to like for it to be like mushrooms are sentient. I'd be like, okay, that makes total sense to me.
And specifically like Terrence McKenna, for a fun example, thinks that they're an antenna, or they are communicating with you, but they're also an antenna that allows you to communicate with some sort of alien entity. And also, he thinks that it's possible that they're not even from Earth because they survive so well in the vacuum of space at like, negative 40 centigrade, as well as in a vacuum. The spores can travel from place to place, and the spores could have hit off an asteroid, been knocked off, could have hit Earth. We don't know. And also, aren't they, I should look this up. I'm sure you probably know. They're different than every other. They're specifically different than all of our other flora and fauna.
Yeah, they're in their
thing.
Totally their own thing. And what's just a couple of interesting things about them that kind of relate it to that is that a mycelial network is very, very similar when imaged to like a neural network.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that. That's one. But the one that I think is really, really interesting is that when they study the proteins of mushrooms, what they've actually found is that they most closely mimic mammal protein because they breathe in oxygen and exhale CO2. There's something I'm not scientifically inclined enough to like explain this properly, but I read it somewhere.
It affects the structure.
Literally part of that metabolism helps them form proteins that are very much like a mammalian meat protein, which is like really fascinating. So you're looking like a brain. You seem to be sentient. Like you're making choices. You have meaty proteins to you. I mean you start maybe there's something to it.
Yeah. What inspired you to start growing psilocybin mushrooms?
Oh man,
where did you start?
This is a long story.
That's okay.
You got a minute?
Yeah, we got time.
Okay. I don't.
We can go for as long as you want.
How far back do you want to go? Okay, so for me, I was raised ultra fundamentalist Christian, like
Ooh.
in a crazy way, like literalist, very, I'd say hateful, sort of brand of Christianity. But the problem is that when I was a kid, I had this sort of mystical experience of sorts where I sort of, my mother told me about, I'm going way back. She told me about the idea of heaven and that heaven lasts forever. And so I'd gone to my room and was, just thinking about the idea of forever, because on a certain level, I was just like, forever doesn't really fit into any of normal reality, right? So I was like, what does forever mean? What does it mean for something to go on and on and on and never end? And I was laying on my floor and I was staring at my ceiling fan, and I just kind of dropped into this space where just like blackness unfolded, and I sort of spread out over this blackness, and I was just like, oh, this is what forever is. It's a thing without end. And the concept of, anyway, so I basically have this mystical experience. Now the problem is that if you're a fundamentalist Christian and you have a mystical experience, it will confirm the frame of reference in which you live in. And so unfortunately for me, I'm not saying like there's much wisdom in there, but when you approach it as a fundamentalist or literally, much of the value is lost. So, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there. But so anyway, so it made me a real believer, not just like baptized, not like I believe these stories, but I had experientially, even though it didn't, like quote me scripture or something, this was confirmation of the other.
Of heaven?
Of a transcendent state, of something more, you call it the presence of God, or something mystical. There's some magic shit that happened to a lot of dudes in the Bible, and I was like, oh, this is kind of like that, And so I went to just church constantly, really had a love for God, and ended up going to just for like 2 semesters, like a theological seminary in Austin. Because I was like, I want to become a preacher because this shit's real to me, right? But the problem is that like I have kind of an inquisitive nature, and so I was just like, hey, can you prove to me any of this like Bible stuff is true? And I wasn't that direct about it, but I was like, look, I'm trying to get down to like how we know this is true. And I was on a certain level, I was like, well, these experiences happen. Surely there is a tradition of confirming it. Well, unfortunately, the tradition of confirming through mystical experience the reality of God is totally off limits for many thousand years within, or like just I think there was some in like the first 2 or 3 centuries after Christ through like Gnostic churches and some other more far out versions, but it's pretty much been completely banned and demonized. And so I made friends with this professor, and he was like, Clint, he's like, I gotta tell you, he's like, I write the textbooks. This is about faith. Yeah. And I currently have a real appreciation for faith, but at the time I was looking for something real. Yeah. And so I immediately was just like, nope.
You were disappointed.
Yeah. I couldn't. I was like, so you're telling me, you at the top of this field are telling me that I'm not going to get answers. And he was like, yeah, you have faith and you can live your life according to this. And I was like, I already, as this conversation had happened, I had really started to look into other religions, other stories, and started hearing about psychedelics and mystical experiences. And specifically, there's a guy named John Safran, who was like a shock jock in Australia. And he had 2 television shows that I got turned on to. And one of them was called Speaking in Tongues. And it was him and this like Catholic bishop. And they would just talk about religious, and they would have like Zoroastrians on, they'd have Sikhs on, and they would kind of explain the world that they were living in. And then Safran came out with another show, which was called John Safran versus God. And he went and participated in all these different religious ceremonies and religious practices. And the most fascinating ones were, one, he went and he drank ayahuasca and South America, and then he did some peyote ceremonies with some people, and I was just like, oh, there's something like there's other ways that people are like getting into these states, and I didn't really was trying to like look at that without putting any value on it, like as like, you know, this means something. It was just like, oh, these experiences are happening, and I need to understand that better. So at the time that I kind of pieced out of seminary, I had not lost my faith, but I was like, oh, I'm looking for ways to experience the transcendent, and basically heard a bunch of Terrence McKenna talks online. I think this was like pre-YouTube, actually. Wow. Like right before YouTube hit.
Wow.
And was able to find like some videos and some explanations found. I can't remember which guide it was, but like PF Tech, like the classic.
Oh yeah.
The like
there.
brown rice flour cakes, and you
been there.
make them and you put them and you vent them, and I loved it because it was just like this process. It felt like science or some shit, and it was like you had to be very careful, pay attention, required some patience, and then when you're done with it all, you get this like a little piece of magic. So it's like there's certain certain ceremonial sort of vibe to it. Is it like if you do all of the steps correctly, you will receive a gift, and so. Yeah, got into that, and grew some psilocybin mushrooms, and were very, very good. I don't know if we're gonna go here, but I also before psilocybin even was I'd heard about DMT.
And before, wow.
Yeah, and so that was where I immediately went, and
immediately.
Yeah, so like as a fundamentalist Christian. I went directly to DMT because I was like, oh, this checks all the boxes. This checks all the boxes of what I'm looking for. And then mushrooms were like kind of came off of that. I was like, oh, there's many paths, you just got this, you got these different substances that'll do this to you. And so, DMT like just completely changed my life. Just completely. That and mushrooms. I mean, both of them are just so powerful.
Was your experience coming out of the church like maybe disassociating yourself with the specific Abrahamic Christian religion, was that a slow burn type thing, or was that kind of like you hit the DMT and you were done?
Well, that was I hit the DMT and I knew something was real. Like I had confirmation again
that in other
that there was something there, but I wasn't really sure how to understand that thing. And there are many traditions, Christian being one of them. So I wasn't really quick to like completely burn off of it, but I was like, oh, there's a more direct path than religious practice to to understanding these things. And but no, it took me a number of years, like really. I started going to like really liberal churches and things like that. It's kind of like you gotta well, because this is something that a lot of people don't realize, but is that when you step out of one reality and into another reality, if you do that too quickly, you can lose your fucking mind. I'm sorry. you can absolutely lose your mind because the structure of the reality that you're living in, it meets all of the requirements for a cohesive reality. And so when you start removing pieces of that and you don't assemble a structure to replace it, or you don't have the convenience. And I was very lucky that I was able to do it, because some people just have it ripped away and they lose their
all you have is distance.
Do you think, and just to go on that, do you think do they lose their minds after this one point because they didn't have a stability to begin with, or why do you think somebody like you can stay stable, or people like us can stay stable to some extent?
I'm not saying I haven't had trouble.
I'm not saying
but I think it really kind of depends on certain predispositions and certain ideas about the world. And so because I never lost a transcendent being like that, I never lost that. There was at least something bigger than myself that I existed within. Whereas like some people I don't think have the structures, and I don't mean this in any condescending way, or don't have the logic to put themselves back together or
it's
you know, or think about things. And so I think with many people with certain issues, fear will kick in because you can't do it. You don't have the means by which to understand it. You are ostracized because of your behavior. And so you end up in this spiral where reality becomes looser and looser and looser. And you eventually just can't really keep a grip.
Give me this. You know, me and Armin have just been, since we live together now, we just talk about these kind of things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're hanging out with the same people and doing the same thing and caravanning home at 4 a.m. thinking about where we are in life and
after gigs and stuff.
Looking at them, after gigs, looking at the moon or looking at cars and being like, what are we doing here?
Mm-hmm.
How are you thinking on a day-to-day basis? How do you? What is your thought? This is it's a hard question to put into terms. But what are you thinking when you're walking around during the day in this reality? It's a very open, ambiguous question, not even worded well, so I'm sorry about that. But I think I kind of get what I'm getting.
No, I think you do.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, it's definitely not constant. Like I deal with I'm open to most anything anyone could tell me, and I like, you could if you could tell me the craziest thing and I'd be like, tell me why that's true.
And let me let me just say real quick, that sort of thinking is almost 100% of the time paired with these sort of experiences. Essentially, it's like when you have these sort of experiences, or even if you go through these, if it's your nature to go through this form of thought, which is kind of logical, you become open to everything. Is my opinion, because it's like the farther and farther I get, it's like, oh my God, I'm like, I sound crazy because I'm like open to something that's crazy. But in reality,
but you realize that you don't know anything.
But exactly, you don't know anything.
You have to like maintain a huge amount of skepticism for everything that, not just what other people say, but everything that you could possibly think, you know?
But then on top of that, which complicates it even more, I guarantee we're all going to agree on this. I know we do. There's a hint of truth somewhere deep
you
down.
Can sense a hint of truth.
You can sense a hint of truth.
And you keep digging to see if you can get a little more.
And that's right. And that's part of this like phenomenological truth within certain experiences that we're kind of getting at. So it's a line that you have to toe essentially. But what we were saying on the other episode is you also have to be practical in your day-to-day life, because we are stuck here in this reality, in this very concrete, authoritarian, rule-based, schedule-based reality. And it's like, you know, you can't really just fall off the deep end and do what you want to do.
Well, yeah, totally. Because there's too many variables. Like, let's say, like, even if I did believe every crazy thing, there's all the things that I don't know that may have an effect. So action has to be skeptical as well. Like, so even the things that like I lean towards, you know, taking action on those things, I think has, taking action is a step of, it's belief. Like you believe something enough to interact on its behalf. You know what I mean? And so, you know, with a lot of these, like, especially less provable things, there's not a lot of
generic scientific evidence, as it were. You know, like you have to dig a little, get over the whole idea that you have to follow some sort of rational paradigm necessarily that's scientific. It's a different kind of science, or perhaps a science we don't yet quite understand.
Or that it's even of this material world.
No, well, that's, I think, inherently the issue, because what we're touching on is probably something that's outside of this dimension, perhaps, or it's a little more advanced than our paradigm currently allows to understand.
And
completely.
It doesn't even have to be super mystical, because, for example, it's like when people were discovering germs, pathogens, and whatnot, they were considered heretics for even bringing it up, and they're like, what are you talking about? We can't
Yeah.
see this. You're not proving it. There are no such thing as, and it's like, okay, and then they proved it. It's like, there are germs. We're kind of in that similar thing right now.
You can't see it.
Yeah.
That's the
You
main thing.
can't see it.
But like
You can experience it.
yeah, I get skeptical to the point where like I'm not convinced of the existence of history. Or and I'm not saying like some sort of like alternative thing, but like, like there's that whole what was it? Descartes was talking about where he was just like, I think it was Descartes. It was like, how can you know that you're just not a brain in a vat manipulated by an evil doctor or something like that? And there's just so much that I can't know. And here's the best part though, is that when you remain skeptical about like reality, time, meaning, like all of these things that we apply to these things just sort of willy-nilly because we suggest, it's really freeing because you can start to think about the world in ways that like give you extreme insight on because you're not dealing literally, you're dealing in like hypotheticals or models and things like that. And so there's certain it's like a good fiction story is that the story is all there. And while the story might not be true, there are certain insights gained, like in certain parts of the book because of, so if you basically stepping into different ways of being gives you, continued perspective on the world. And so I think it's good for that reason as well.
And when you're in this sort of mindset where you're looking at everything skeptically and you are so open that you almost have nothing, that can almost translate to meaninglessness, a sort of nihilism, like we were talking about earlier. What can you talk to us about, or can you talk to us about finding meaning?
I mean, that's something I struggled with for a long time because I was trying to look for like a singular meaning or something like that. And I think that the real answer is that the world's overflowing with meaning. I'd mentioned this a bit earlier. And I mean, the idea is that we're trying to like attach to like a single narrative that is like, oh, you live for this reason because you do this, and you or the Christian ones like you live to serve God or love God, and that when the world ends, you will go and the meaning is that you're going to go worship this thing for.
You're going to go worship this thing
for for
being told that
the rest of eternity. And so let's see, I was trying to remember exactly where I was going with this.
Well, because before there was a central, monotheistic God figure for you early in your life, and then you had like a moment when you approached your preacher, right, or pastor, and professor, and he kind of shattered your world real quick.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. Meaning. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that like everything is meaningful. Like all of the things that you do or believe about the world speak to, your reality. Like I'm not doing this very, very much justice right now, but I just keep wanting to say.
How have you found meaning?
So,
if even, or how do you continue
to try to look for it or whatever,
try anything?
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely struggle with, because you end up in this situation where you start thinking about like to understand what is meaningful, you would have to understand like what reality is. And so I kind of live in this space where I feel like there are overarching themes in reality that other people have used to derive meaning. And I feel like there's a certain thread that flows through those about understanding yourself. And by understanding yourself, you're understanding an aspect of this like totality of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And when you understand that but like everything is everything, then there's no aspect of you or of reality that isn't completely vital. And so it just depends on where your head's at in the moment. And so it's like at a certain moment, it's entirely vital that like this, like can be in this particular space. So it's like on some sort of level, and you have to project a great deal to like find meaning in that. But on like a more grand scale, is it like, well, if that wasn't total perfection, the universe would like cease to be. And so I think that, what's closest to you, what are you thinking about is meaningful because you are a divine thing contemplating itself. Essentially, when you contemplate anything in existence, you are trying to understand it, and it exists on a physical level, I think least important, but then there's a symbolic level. And then even if we live in a world that has been robbed of symbolism, that you can understand why that narrative has robbed symbolism, which is meaningful in a certain. So it just depends on. You can get like very meta with anything. Is that like the reason this feels meaningless is because there's a structure surrounding my thought process around it that makes me interpret it as meaningless. But I think that if you look, you find meaning everywhere that you want to. And so I try not to think about meaning so much as I try to just interact with the things that are in front of me and extract as much wisdom or something out of them as I can. I mean, I'm not like, I'm not grilling on this like all the time, but when I take a moment to
that's fair.
It can go there.
This is a difficult thing to put into a question or just one phrase, because we're talking about something that can actually provide you a consistent feeling of purpose throughout your life. And that's not necessarily consistent, Yeah. And so, like right now, I was trying to figure out how to ask this question, and I can't figure it out. So I'm just going to kind of anecdotally get into it. But like for me, for example, I've had some similar experiences as you, early on in my life. And so part of for me, I guess this is a bit of faith that has to do with this, but it's the idea that I might not actually be able to attain this like coveted holy grail meaning. I might not be able to do that in this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's the bit of faith that I have, which is that there is higher meaning available, and I can feel that there is because, well, I can feel it. I can't tangibly put it in very, very specific terms, but I can feel something. And I take comfort in the feeling that there is another level. There's another level.
That's really the biggest thing is that okay, once a person has this understanding that things are meaningful because you are part of a totality, right?
Yeah.
What's meaningful for me right now is trying to interact with aspects of that.
Yeah.
Is just basically keeping that in mind and constantly trying to engage with it in different ways, as we've like pretty consistently engaged with it forever.
Yeah. Like even having this conversation is a form of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let me play the super, super cynical person here.
I love it.
Do it.
What if, this is all a ploy?
By who?
I don't know. Something that's above us in some sense, in the fact that we can have all of this, but then at the same time, now you can always go back and say that there's still meaning within this, but it's like there is the possibility that this may just be the inside of something else that can easily be deleted or be done away with, or that there actually is a sinister ending.
Okay. Oh, okay. So our venture into truth is actually some demonic figure like putting a carrot on a stick and dangling at us and being like, yeah, come chase this meaning. Come find this meaning in your life, you wayward sheep, or something.
Or potentially it's always going, I'm not saying it is, but I think you have to be aware of it because we're on the path that we don't know.
Yeah.
And that we are open to everything, that it could be a sinister ending.
Yeah, but I think the one thing, and this is like the Descartes thing, is that you can't deny is that you are a point of awareness, right? Yes. And so even if there is, and I actually subscribe to that. Like within the tenets of like Gnosticism, that the world is some sort of prison planet or illusion presented by an entity less than the perfect totality of the universe, but higher than man. Now, it may not be intelligent necessarily, but it is powerful. And so, on that level, like I already live there. And so the way that I take heart to answer this, because the example actually applies, is that like I recognize that I am a point of awareness that directly relates to something much, much, much larger and bigger than this deceiving spirit in the world, I think is the way to talk about it. And that, so the reason these experiences are both good and dangerous is that I think that there are situations where you can take these things and interact with lower level things that will deceive you. And I think that they directly correspond to not actively living with the knowledge that you are a transcendent being, or that you are God, or an aspect of God. I'm not saying like I'm God, but the reason that we are these sparks, we are these flames of a reflecting thing individuated into persons. And so what you have is that all of these different psychedelics, different magical practices, there are, like, you might say that if you go into these spaces and you interact with something that deceives you or is negative, what it is doing is if you can fall for those things, it is indicative that there is a deficit within you that corresponds to those desires. So it's like I'm trying to think of a good example. Like a good example is like people are like, oh, I'm going to do some magic. I want money, right? And it's like, and you may interact with a transcendent other that may be something trying to bring to your awareness that if you recognize you as a aspect of the totality, you wouldn't be worried about making gains within an illusional world. And so the idea is that you basically recognize, and this is like a Jungian thing as well, is that basically all of your desires and all of the things that keep you trapped in the material world there's a certain, before you become self-aware, there's the world that you were born into and all of the context, and this shapes the things, the needs, the wants that make you a citizen or a person that is driven to live within the world. And part of that awareness of being something divine is gnosis, is this idea is to transcend, to recognize your divinity. And then the idea is that when you recognize that, you actually begin to gain free will, because as you recognize that the things that you desire correspond to not being fully content with just being, so anything that you can pursue is a stumbling block to the peace of being, just be. And so I think that you end up with so the idea is that you can't overcome those things. Like these actually get wired into your system. But what you can do, and this is why I say free will, is that you can become aware of them and you can choose to not engage them because you recognize that it's part of like the scar of being embodied in flesh, is that there's a context that you're born into. And so when you recognize that your context births you into everything that you could possibly want, the idea is to bring all of those things to the surface. So like Jungians would say, it's like shadow work. So the things you don't know, don't know. And it's like, you can't change them. But once you know them, you have free will and you have consciousness of these aspects. And so you can basically then interact in the world as an actual aware agent who recognizes their divinity, and you can choose to do things that can bring other people into the awareness of their totality without working against it. And the game gets so serious sometimes is that like we totally forget what we're doing here. You know what I mean? Like we end up trying to do all of these things because mom didn't hold me or some shit like that. I mean, that's real. You
not even that, or just what society may be telling us.
There's that, but I think like a lot of people have, there's certain like deeper traumas for a lot of people, and you can live your whole life for an inadequacy that if you could just bring it into awareness, there's a freeing, thing that happens where you can just be, just like being. And okay, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say like there's another side to this where I think that, and you guys can tell me what you think about this, but I've noticed that in order to become aware of your divinity, like you said, so you actually need to for a second like really step outside yourself and the shell that you're in. Because every day when you wake up, you're waking up, and guess what? You have these two like balls on your head by which you see the whole world and experience it. And instantly when you wake up and you open your eyes, the first thing you're thinking about is, what is this ego doing here on this plane? So if you're like by nature, by your just very animalistic nature, trapped inside a body that has to materialistically experience life. So it's very difficult to step outside of that because we're in this like very material shell. And but moreover, there seems to be the type of person that doesn't even question that. Not only are they not aware of how to get outside of themselves, they don't even know that is an option to step outside of yourself. And they would be sitting here and listening to you or listening to me and being like, what the heck are you talking about?
And on top of
I'm
that,
hungry.
Yeah.
Like
and on top of that, it's like the people who are in charge, the folks that are in charge, they don't want you to have this realization either. Because
I was getting there, but
dissolves the power structure. And the reason that psychedelics are illegal, and Terence McKenna has a sentence that said it best. He put it in like one sentence. I might even have the picture on my phone from a long, long time ago. They're illegal because they dissolve the power structure and they dissolve the architecture of reality and society, and not necessarily in a negative way, but in a freeing way that goes against what those in power are trying to accomplish.
Well, yeah.
And we're seeing that, and not even with psychedelics, that's just a very specific thing. We're seeing this today. We're seeing it, as we've talked about every freaking episode so far, and everybody else is talking about the censorship of material. You're seeing, even with Facebook, as of a few days ago, the censorship of accounts, like complete deletion of your account if you stream live music on it. It's like, really? We're worried about that? Well, that's because we want to make sure that the record companies and the music software,
the bottom line, it's the bottom line
is in check.
And that's where we've gone in this world. And that actually, I feel like relates to what you were saying about there being like the highest being, which is the proverbial God.
Mhm.
But there's also like these slightly lesser entities that are very powerful, like way more powerful than we are, that we may confuse as being gods.
Mhm.
But in reality, they may be demons. And I'm using these words kind of like loosely, like demons and God. Like, I just
It's
want
just
people to be
jargon
aware. It's just jargon because I
for
just
the-
don't know another language
Yeah.
verb
It's
to
like
say
the
it.
emotional connection to this entity. It's like demonic. Quote unquote,
Yeah.
but
But I think, like, this is going to sound nutty because a moment earlier you were saying you were trying to be the devil's advocate, and I'm trying to kind of do this right now. But it's like, I don't want to get extremely supernatural about this, but it does appear that this obsession with the bottom line or likes or this and that, people wonder.
control.
Yeah, it's control, but people wonder, for example, they think, well, like, we don't have to worry about a tiger eating us. We don't have to worry about shelter really all that much. You have this thing which is so beautiful. You have all this tech, and it's like it seems like life is better, but it also seems like we're actually less happy.
Yeah.
And you look at societies, for example, that don't have this sort of technology, or they don't have first world problems.
Yeah.
Like they're not worried about Amazon. They're not
Yeah.
worried about people hating them on Instagram, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. They don't go through the same psychological issues that we do. They don't
No.
go through, oh God, this is dicey for me to say. I'm not even going to say it probably right now, but
Okay.
they don't go through certain psychological issues that we're seeing.
Ego issues.
Ego issues, exactly, that we're seeing right now. And
Well, that's what
not
I'm
to
saying.
Say, that is, to be very careful and to be sympathetic. That's not to say that we don't care about the people who are feeling this way, and that we are going to help you out no matter what, honestly. As long as you're not hurting anybody else, we're going to help you out. But we also have to be real and practical, and we need to make sure that the ego is not too involved in what we're doing, because right now it is.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it's among the public, among the, just the citizen population, the ego is so involved. And that's what the people in power want.
Yeah, they
Because that
want,
allows
because
us
that's
to
the
control-
money maker. If your
Yeah.
ego is activated at the highest level, then you're the best consumer.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and that's such a very I know this is cliche to say all these things like, oh, people with less gadgets are actually happier than us. Did you know that? And it's like, I know that's cliche and everything, but it's true, dude.
And, quick example of that, I recently disabled my Instagram. I had to, because I was just seeing so much crap on there.
Yeah.
And I'm happier.
Yeah.
Now, I'm probably going to get it back because of music. But,
Well, I wanted to ask you, Clint, is like, how literal are you when you say things like there are cosmic level entities that are influencing us? Like, how literal are you with that?
I mean, so it gets kind of difficult because I think it's like there's a sort of both and situation that you kind of end up in, is that, I mean, in the narrative, that the reality that we are currently participating in, I think that there are individual awarenesses above and beyond human consciousnesses that people have been interacting with for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
I think that they try to gain the attention and sway of human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of them there are certain dominants like that have existed for like long periods of time.
can you give us a specific?
I mean, the one that Gnosticism talks about, and I'm not saying I don't think this is the first or the last entity, but they would say that the God of the Old Testament is Yaldabaoth, which is a false creator. And so
Wow.
there was there were these things called aeons that existed in the heavens. This is just a story that they tell. But
I've heard of
so
it.
take it literally, but it's also a metaphor, but it also kind of functions literally. So it's there's one of these both and sort of situations.
Yeah.
And so what you have is a a God that separates itself from the collective, the group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it comes and it takes from the existing matter of the world and puts it together in a very shoddy way and says, I am the ultimate creator and I made the earth. Even though...
But they're imposters.
Well, the thing is that because the thing that Yaldabaoth in the story makes a reality out of existed before them, he is not a creator. He is a thing pretending to be king in the reality, right?
Kind of building with what he already has.
Building with what already exists. Building out of pieces of the imaginal, or of pieces of the totality of the existing, the God that exists that is the totality. That's the way I like to use
like
God.
Led Zeppelin stealing blues music.
It's like God's everything, right?
I feel like language is hard.
Yeah, and so what I see going on is that there may have been other aspects, but what you have is you have a false creator, right? And so what this thing does is it pretends like it is the ultimate God in reality, and it says, I'm the ultimate God. I do have control over aspects of this domain. If you follow me and I'll reward you, right? But one of the things that you have going on is you have the Abrahamic faiths in particular have been the dominant for several thousand years now, right? And so what you have is through the worship of a deity that has certain characteristics, I think that culturally and religiously you begin to emulate the creator, right? And so what you have is you very quickly have the beginning of heroes. You have individualized egos acting on behalf of themselves. They're saying, I am the creator of my own world. I have drive, I have will that supersedes any other obligations that would exist in, say, like a more tribal, or let's say you live in a pantheistic world. You have to contend with all of the other aspects. And so when you focus on a single thing that says it's the creator and you begin to identify with it culturally, you basically set up, instead of a balance of like a pantheon or of a pantheism, you end up with a dominance hierarchy. You end up with a God that says this thing. And so what you see is you see culture continually emulates that, and the individual emulates that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that you basically have several thousand years of the, not by the same name, but this archetypal figure, right? So you have, the way I would talk about it is you have, I think it starts with Zoroastrianism is this sort of this or that creator God sort of mythology, right? And then you have the Hebraic faiths, which were very, very diverse. And then from there, there's huge influence with Egyptian lore and the idea that there's a single dominant God. And then the Greeks, you have the same thing. I'm not saying it necessarily started with, Yaldabaoth being in the Old Testament is just kind of like the best point of reference because we live in a world post all of that. But if you look, like the figure shows up in Greek mythology as Zeus, it shows up in Zoroastrianism, it shows up in Judaism. And so what you have is you have this dominator thing. And so you start structuring society like that. And so you have, we'll call it this archetype, this dominant individualistic archetype, right?
Yeah.
And
Pharaohs, kings,
all the shit, right?
Like a hierarchical society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what you have is you have all these older religions into Greece, and then you have Greece into Rome, and this power structure then moves into the Roman, the Holy Roman Catholic Church through the same structure. It has the same identity as it manifests in these other mythologies. And then from there, you have the Protestant split, and you have a new dominance of the empire. So you have the British Empire acting as the new emanation of the demiurge, or this false god.
Yeah, because they kind of like adopted this, like the idea that the king is a holy,
Right,
which isn't a new thing whatsoever.
and so you have it pop up there, and then from there you have it. What do? They go into the world, they assimilate the pantheons of religious people, create hierarchical structures, and within 2 generations, all of these people are seemingly serving the same archetypal force or the same deity through different names. And so you have, Rome does this, it assembles pantheons. The Holy Roman Catholic Church does this, and then through the ultimate individualized endeavor, capitalism, through the British Empire, you have them go into the world operating as this false creator. It says, oh, well, these are all of these things of the world, and I'm going to take them and I'm going to sell them as if they invented them or something like that. So you have the same model that goes through, and then you have that transfer into imperialism in the United States. And so, but what I'm saying is the archetype has remained in power for at least like 3,000 years.
Right.
And
more.
Maybe more. I think that there are different dominants that come in. And so this particular lesson, I think, is highlighted in Gnosticism. And so the idea is recognizing that there is this real or not, like literally real. I can't give it a name but as a spiritual force, as a what would you call that? Like a structure that exists underneath reality. It has existed and it has these same characteristics. So it's identifiable, even though it may not be exactly literal. It's a tendency that exists in the world that has been going on for like a really long period of time.
I think another thing to go along with that, this is slightly different, but we are hierarchical creatures naturally. Do we feel like this is going along with what we're talking about?
In the most basic sense, even in the primitive sense, I would say, yeah.
I'm saying in a primitive sense, we are. And you can see it.
Because I mean, if you just do something as silly as go to, like, for example, like a group of gorillas in the jungle, there's hierarchy there. Everywhere there's hierarchy there. And it's like to say that we don't have a hierarchy, or that we just made up a hierarchy out of nowhere, which is totally human and not animalistic. That's right. That's naive.
The hierarchy wasn't constructed. It's been absolutely exploited.
It's been exploited, which is a human thing. I
believe. I think yeah, it is a human thing, because you're not seeing gorillas or baboons exploit the hierarchy. And by the way, gorillas and baboons and chimpanzees, they do horrible things.
How about those bonobos though?
Yeah, bonobos too. I think actually bonobos is what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
But okay, Clint, on this note, talk to us about your opinion just about what is going on in society right now. You can pick anything, but maybe let's go with what's happening with the civil unrest, the election.
If I may add to that, do you think that like this entity, this false god, I almost feel like, and I want to be careful because I don't want to appear as like completely Looney Tunes and saying this, because it's like I actually like, maybe after the show we can get a little deeper on this, but do you think that, I think this entity is worried. I think that there's more people waking up now to the realization that the system by which what we are taking for granted as being our imperialist globalist world, we're really taking it for granted, and we're not, and people are realizing that this is not the best road for the race to live in. This is not the road for humanity. This is something that is we're being manipulated, you know?
Yeah.
Does this make any sense to you? What I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah. I mean, at my most hopeful,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there is a collective awareness of this like shadow aspect of us, which is this self-serving, you know, screw everybody else sort of mentality that we've been operating with. And I think that it's been a shadow. It's been, you know, when you look at like the 1950s and you look at like the good old, nobody's talking about us, you know, destroying other nations or, you know, getting involved in all of these ways. And so it's been a shadow thing. It's been the thing that supports us, but we've been unwilling to face it. And so I think that like collectively we're facing our collective shadow as a capitalistic, individualistic group.
Sure.
And I think that, you know, I think that part of that has the potential to make dramatic changes. And so there's two tendencies I have. One is that there are different dominants that exist, and that the age of the I'm going to pull back just a little bit. Is that if reality is this, if reality is the totality of everything, is that there is a thing that is so infinite that it can't even comprehend itself, and that it participates in smaller level models to understand itself, and
simulations of itself.
That's what reality is it interacting with all aspects of itself. And so to engage this particular aspect of itself, we have the reality that we live in. And so what we're doing is we're participating with this individualistic thing, and that we are integrating it into collectively, but on behalf of the totality, we are helping it understand itself by living out its expression through a comprehensible medium, which is a lower dimensional reality, which is like us participating in time. Whereas this thing can't understand itself because at higher levels of consciousness or awareness, everything sort of becomes everything, and it becomes hard to tell what's this or what that. And so to understand itself, I think that reality is playing out different aspects of itself, and it's happening on different levels. So I think that like a lifetime, my job is to integrate all of them that present themselves to me to become a whole smaller model of the totality, right? And then there are group dynamics. So it's like certain cultures play out certain dominance. They have certain religious motifs that they play out that correspond to this understanding. And then on the largest scale, I think that there is a cosmic dominant, and that it seems like, you know, several thousand years of living under the dominant of this particular archetype seems like a very long time, but it's just part of like a very large cycle of cycling through these different aspects. And so as we cycle through them, we participate with physical reality in different ways. And so you might say that I'll just throw out some crazy shit. And I'm not like, a lot of this stuff's not really literal, but it might be literal. But like the idea of Atlantis is these the past ages are different models of reality that we have worked through and that came to completion, and then a new dominant starts. If you look at the Hopi legends, there have been like multiple different destructions through different mediums, and I think that those mediums give indication that the destructions are related to different archetypes that are playing themselves out in reality. Now, I said there were two options. The other option is that we are some sort of special holy creature that has been trapped in a soul well, and the illusion is presented to us to keep us trapped because a thing that can trick us will keep us trapped here until we can gain higher levels of consciousness.
Which is kind of a biblical thing a little bit, is it?
Well,
In some sense, which is that like we're holy, but we've stumbled into unfortunately this way of living, or we've been put into this way of living that is challenging our holiness constantly.
Yeah, but I would say that what it is that all the things that you can think or feel generate emotion, and as a divine thing, when you generate feeling, the feeling can be taken from you because you're giving it away instead of just being as part of this larger aspect. And so the worst case scenario is that you're in a soul well and they'll just change the illusion and you won't even know that it happened. Right. And that it'll just keep more. And that there's a certain leakage of enlightened people. Like as you reach these certain densities of novelty or certain densities of awareness collectively, like right now, if you look at the curve of like, I'll use McKenna's novelty. That
we talked about this last episode.
Yeah, is that we're at like a super huge peak of that.
Yeah.
And that there are a certain number of people that on that curve have the realization and escape the illusion. Yeah. But all of these people that you were talking about that don't necessarily, they're not reflecting on this.
They're just like, what are you talking about?
Reality will just shift again, and they will be here doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And you know, on some days, I really feel like that might be the case. I know I'm talking like super far out, so I want to be really clear. Is that like I only partially. It's hard to talk about literal or not literal because things are symbols and they're real at the same time. And my experiences have led me to believe in this transcendent all that we have we're intertwined with it in this way. And so there's something going on, and to make sense of that, there's some sort of illusion that's bringing those things to light. And on the grandest scale, let's say there even is this thing that is tricking us, is that it performing that trick is bringing us into awareness of a wedge or an aspect of the totality. So even at its worst, it's a divine thing as well because it exists within the totality. And so if you ever, like whenever I get like really worried or worked up about anything, I start to try to always step back and look at larger context. So even the worst things in the world, like a crazy fake God that keeps human souls trapped and sucks them dry, is actually part of something much, much bigger experiencing itself.
That's a good way to think about it. That's a helpful way because honestly, I need to be doing that.
Just keep zooming out.
I get stuck very easily in the negative context when I start to think about this kind of stuff. And if I'm thinking about something like that, like a trickster type, this kind of sounds like this jester.
Very powerful, jokester, but false god.
Yeah, false thing that will keep you stuck somewhere. It's definitely a good thing to zoom out like that.
I've actually heard of like models of what's referred to as the Comet of Consciousness, and for the sake of like not attracting like negative attention or publicity to these people, I'm going to keep them anonymous, but what they were saying, and I was very excited that you were talking about the false god and the higher god, and also the idea that perhaps this highest entity is maybe like omnipresent, omniscient, but he doesn't necessarily like know why. He doesn't necessarily, or it doesn't necessarily know exactly the answer to the question why everything exists.
Yeah.
He knows everything that exists, but not the why.
See, like, for me though, like I think at the highest level is it can't be aware, right? For it, I think that there are lower levels that are aware, but for it to be aware, it would have to have the space for awareness. Like you see what I'm saying? Is it
the limitation of ego?
It would have to have perspective to understand itself.
And there is no more perspective.
And because it is everything.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So,
But Also, another thing you were saying, which is this I've heard before, and I'm gonna catch up to the Comet consciousness in a second.
Yeah, I want to hear that.
But which is a really crazy thing. But so it doesn't know why. So at best, what it thinks it can do is create billions and trillions of subjective versions of itself. So in this universe, or we could touch up on this later, whether like we are the only super intelligent sentient beings, which would be the version of Genesis, or whether we're here with other aliens, whatever. But let's say that we're one of the expressions of God.
Mm-hmm.
And in us are a small piece of its divine power.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going through the motion trying to attain meaning. And some of these experiments don't go very well, which are the people that are kind of like asleep. They're like, what are you guys talking about? Leave me alone. I want Twinkies. And then other people, they're like, oh my God, like what the hell? Like I want to see something out of this. This can't be all. And then, so now, Comet consciousness. The model that I heard about was that at the head of the comet, the very head leading the comet is the omnipresent God. And in it isn't necessarily anything evil. It's just trying in its purest sense to attain some semblance of an answer to why. And at the tail end of the comet, the very tip is all this evil that's trying to siphon the energy from the comet as much as it can, but it's like it's still so far below it. It can never catch up because the comet is as far ahead as this long tail, this long, beautiful consciousness comet. And it's just like, well, maybe if I amass power through the manipulation of these entities, I can come closer to the head and take it over. And it's really insane. This model of consciousness, because it's putting it into like this kind of material human form, or like a comet. I don't know if it's necessarily a comet or whatever it is, but maybe it looks like a comet, whatever. But I guess because before we started talking about or before we turn on the play button, you were talking briefly about all these like esoteric kind of like magic realm mysticism things.
Mm-hmm.
In mysticism, is there an attempt like we're doing to get, because I don't know too much about it and I want to get more into it. Is there an attempt to get closer to this divine truth? Are these same questions, are they appearing in mysticism? What is mysticism, the main purpose of it necessarily? I mean,
I think a lot of it is basically direct experience of the divine, as I think kind of the principal idea behind it. And you said something that just clicked with me, and I'm trying to pick it back up.
Which one? It's a comet, divine. The head at the head is the ultimate, and at the tail is the lesser entities, the evils, the more.
Yeah.
And then I was saying, what else? Mysticism. What is the main question of mysticism? What else did I say?
So, I lost this. I had a good thought, but it escaped me a little bit. But I think that, we start talking about this. Is mysticism addressing, coming into? I mean, I think that's the whole thing, is coming into the transcendent. Is to this totality. Now, there are false paths that exist that I think exist to channel people to deal with their deficits, right? And so when I think that magic is real, there are so many factors that will stifle your magic, including other people's beliefs about what reality is. Like, I think that we're kind of as single aspects of God, that our collective beliefs sort of hold things together. And so when you try to do something magical, not only are you struggling to perform the task, but you're struggling against an established reality. So it's not even like there are things like directly working against you. So all that being said is that I think that there is magic where you are making changes that don't involve the belief or understanding of other people. So generally, this is why magic's not really replicable, is because it's very meaningful and individualized, because within your reality, no one can collapse that because it's internal to you. So you're able to solo experience these sorts of things. And then on a slightly higher level, cults in a lot of ways are able to manifest things because they have a collective mind that, based on their cult beliefs, will not limit the potentials for reality. So when you're participating in a small group of people that have non-traditional beliefs, that you can have experiences that are not part of collective reality. So I'm not saying there's like really any magic per se, but there is your conscious participation with reality that will allow, because I think you're doing it, is that because you're doing it where there is not conflict, there is room for change, if you see what I'm saying, right? And so there's that. But then there's the other part, which is the part where people try to do these things for their wants, desires. I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. And that is the actual dangerous part, is that you can channel your reality to make things happen, but you are actually only channeling things that correspond to your forgetfulness of your divineness. And so I think that like real, safe, good magic is you doing things for other people to bring them into awareness. If you're doing anything for yourself, it's sort of a contradiction, because there's things that you want. And I think that at our deepest core is just being, and then wanting others to be with you. And so it's bringing other people's into that. So the only magic I would say that is good is the things that you can do that bring other people into just being.
Wow. Yeah. And, I feel like even that's almost kind of like a goal with what we're doing right here, right now.
Yeah.
We're trying to connect with other people, or at least like
through a material way.
Through a material way, of course.
Yeah. Well, there's no other way.
There's not another way right
not
now.
That we're aware of, yeah.
Or, because of our whole platform here, like with our music, with the podcast, as a band, as a group of people, and going off of what you were saying just a little bit ago about channeling your reality, or cults being able to channel experiences and stuff like that. Our group, the Houston Ensemble, there are 4 of us that are tightly interwound in this group, and we've been having that happen. And this is going along with, I wanted to talk about this too, like synchronicity.
Like creepy stuff.
Creepy.
Dude,
synchronicity.
People don't want to believe it, but like if you've ever taken LSD with a bunch of close friends or something, like there's some really weird shit that, especially if you go out in public, man. The world starts to warp to, certain things. And so, I think you're nailing it, is that this is the thing, is that we're all participating in this larger limiting world because we're essentially fed all of the things that give us doubt and structure to the world. And so, like for me, my most magical time was when I was living in the woods in California, when I was growing weed. I basically, I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't. Well, sorry, I had a burner phone, but I didn't have access to the internet. I wasn't on any Facebook. I was living off the grid, and so when you unplug from the narrative, your potentials increase. And it's the same thing as like a lot of people say, "Oh, those silly brown people," but like when you look at like tribal cultures throughout the entire world, is that these people exist in quite literally a different reality. And it's a different reality because the thing that everybody's fooled with is reality is actually participatory.
Right.
It's you are actively interacting with a living world, and that what you have going on in this scientific materialist model is that you have an existing world that you live in, and you are literally helpless. And I have this thing that happened to me. Oh, I had that thing that happened to me. And it's because you're contextualizing it as, and I don't want anybody to take this wrong, but like as a victim of the world. And I'm not,
Yes.
it hurts. A lot of these things are not real. I'm not saying that victimhood is not real, or traumas aren't real, or your context or fucking genetic birth defects. There's all this. There's the thing that you're born into, but there's a certain level of awareness that I think that you hit that allows you to actually become. Have free will.
Transcend those
things. Because when you're aware of all of the emotion, all of the deficits, all of the things that built your world, then you can transcend that through full awareness, full active awareness of the world that you're living in. And that's what's missing. And, when we talked about meaning, is that when you hit that spot, then what's meaningful? What's meaningful is just being a creator, is like literally creating reality and this is why McKenna was so good, is that he could sit there and he knew how to talk in a way that he could shift your reality by giving you information that you were totally unaware of and building like a submodel of reality where things can happen, like
where you can actually think of different things,
where you can think and at the pinnacle exists differently, which is what happened to him with the experiment in La Chorrera. As they go down there, and these guys, I mean, when you read what they wrote, like the science behind it, it's total madness. It doesn't hold up to anything. But because it didn't exist before, they literally built a real reality that shifted reality around.
This is the sound science, the science of the sound frequencies, or
no
language.
When McKenna was in South America, he came up with this idea that you could lock in a psychedelic trip through making certain tones. So it's a little bit about sound.
Yeah.
So there was that. And then he also, there's just a number of ideas that were based on alchemy and essentially science fiction.
Okay.
And he kind of assembled them into a story that shifted his reality for like weeks and weeks and weeks, to the point where he was like witnessing UFOs, like butterflies were coming and landing on his hands and shit like that. Yeah. But when he would try to show a doubter, they would collapse the potential. He couldn't perform the thing. And he thought he was crazy. But that's the thing, is that when you can isolate your mind, then I think that infinite potentials unfold. And this is one of the things why I say, like, I don't really necessarily believe in history, is that history and this story contextualizes the modern world. And I don't necessarily think that that's true. Like, I think that we just might only exist in a moment, and that history is assembled out of it's like a cone shape, is that you have now, and that for you to end up right here, this narrative has to exist. And so as we're progressing through reality, our beliefs of what was before us, even though the past can't technically exist because we only live in a single moment, right? Is that what's happening is that all of the narrative, all of history assembles to validate the current reality that people are living in.
Yeah. It's almost self-fulfilling, the way that people talk about history, and on many levels of our society. And it's mind-boggling that people are not only taught this same history, but they also believe and regurgitate the same history. Because the truth is, man, there are people, like I said, waking up to what we're talking about, but there could be way more that are aware of how elusive history is, and how you gotta take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Well, on a certain level, it's meaningless, because you are where you are right now. Even if let's say you believe in some sort of like, not narrative history, but some sort of like physical history of the world. Like, even then, like those things have no bearing on anything in the world. Like it doesn't, my life is not improved by understanding how galaxies form. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
That's true.
I mean, unless I could find some sort of like metaphor to it. And I think on a deep level, those just might be creation myths.
Yeah.
That the subconscious is bubbling up using the, the criteria that it has in front of it, which is like, these are the tools that you have to work with, like how will it manifest? So for some reason that reminded me of aliens. We all think about aliens.
Perfect. We said in episode 4 we would talk about aliens, so here you go.
Yeah, let's talk about it and how we're doing on time. Just curious.
We're at an hour 34.
I think that we could talk about aliens a little bit and then wrap it up. What do you think?
Yeah, we just do a natural discussion on aliens.
Yeah.
And that'll be good.
Well, the fascination with aliens, and we talked about this the last episode, is there's a part of me, because I used to be balls deep on aliens.
Mm-hmm.
It was to the point where I was like constantly using a Freedom of Information Act to like try to get documents from government agencies. And none of them would ever do it. None of them. It was just a cat and mouse game where I would email or mail the CIA. I'd follow all their orders, and they would just come back to me 6 months later like, yeah, we know what you're talking about, but we don't have it. Maybe the Air Force has it.
Yeah.
So but even that experience alone, whereas like, they were on some level acknowledging the existence of what I was looking for, but not giving it to me.
Yeah.
It confirmed to me that there was knowledge of something out of this world, extraterrestrial, or perhaps that the government was in the very least confused about some of the things it was seeing.
Yeah.
But so what are your thoughts on like this recent?
And real quick, we already know you have thoughts on it because the business card, the mushroom business
saucer.
name is Flying Saucer Farms.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it one more time just because you're here.
Yeah.
Flying Saucer Farms at Flying Saucer Farms on Instagram.
Yeah.
Flying Saucer Farms at gmail.com. Follow him. Check him out. Go to the Urban Harvest Farmers Market. Buy the mushrooms. Let's continue with the aliens.
Or don't. We're cool. You can come talk and not buy
Yeah.
mushrooms. I'm down for whatever. Okay, so aliens, right? I think that there's a lot of stuff going on with aliens, right? So have you ever read Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia?
No, I want to, but
No.
Okay, he basically goes through and discusses the parallels between the Fae folks, so the fairy lore, goblins. What else was it? Aliens, goblins, fairies. But basically, there's when you look and you examine the interactions that people have with them, that there's basically this huge overlap. Whereas all of those things seem to be the actual same phenomena, but manifested in a different cultural lens. And he nails it down like pretty hard. It's pretty hard to deny. I think he does a really great job. And so I think that, when you talk about UFOs and aliens, I'm not really, I think that those might be two separate phenomena that have been conflated together, and that maybe part of the, being taken aboard a ship is a creative play on how you interact with the aliens, right? Because I think that.
What are you saying, that the abduction stories are iffy, or what are you saying?
No, I think that they're real, but I think that the way that those people are participating, because this is an impossible aspect of reality, so it has infinite potential. So I think that what you have is people interacting with a spiritual force in the world that has taken on different cultural forms throughout time, and that what you have right now is you have it taking on the form of coming to visit you in a piece of impossible technology. like a piece of technology that transcends like what we know. So
when you say UFOs and aliens are conflated, are you saying they're totally different things, or are you saying some UFOs may be aliens but others aren't? Can you be specific on that?
I don't personally, I've not seen anything that would lead me to believe that there are creatures from other planets visiting our world. So I'll be clear about that. Is that what I think you have happening is that you have a spiritual phenomena, which is contact with aliens or little green men or like all of these things that directly correspond to older lore, right? And so, and then I think that there are lights that occur in the sky that may be part of something completely different. But because if you have two impossible things, you just tend to put them in the same box.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you what we may have happening is that people are framing up their, spiritual entity experiences in technology because that makes sense currently, right? So it's like,
oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and
can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
Maybe just to clarify one thing. Kind of going along with this, Terrence McKenna thinks, and you said alien encounters are extremely cultural.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend was in a class talking all about this, and they studied the cultural differences between alien abductions or even racial differences in alien abduction stories.
Yeah.
And there are major differences, but then Terrence McKenna also talks about it as the quote-unquote UFO classic abduction being brought aboard a ship is potentially a hallucination of this experience, and it is something that has been kind of manifested culturally through our collective conscience to be the classic alien abduction, but in reality that's not what is going on, and that maybe you are just interacting with something. And for example, like I've had an experience where I felt like I was in a chair in some sort of alien thing, and when I closed my eyes I saw them there.
Yeah.
And I felt the headpiece.
Yeah.
But they still had that classic look to them.
Yeah.
Which demeans the experience for me a little bit. It makes me more skeptical of the experience. But at the same time, I was like, wow, that felt pretty freaking real.
Yeah.
So, I just want to put that in context. You can continue.
Yeah. I think so. I think the thing is that like my biggest point is like I don't think that we're being visited by creatures from another planet. I think that there is some sort of like, most likely some sort of like interdimensional thing that we would have associated with angels, demons, goblins, fairies, like that these are all the exact same sort of thing, which is like some sort of spiritual other that exists. Now, the UFO thing, I think, on a certain level, I think is the reemergence of mystery within culture, right? So let's get away from the aliens, but like the actual phenomena, right? Is that the realities become very, very, very rigid. And I think that as reality becomes rigid, that it tends to crack. And so I think that, what you're seeing when you see a UFO is you're seeing something that denies consensus reality. And when you have an experience that denies consensus reality, you then have the ability to, I want to say, like, interject novelty into the world. Because the thing is that, what I was saying is I live in a participatory world, right? So if you experience a thing that fractures the world that you live in, then your world becomes malleable again, because anything is possible once you've witnessed something that is impossible, that you're confident of. Yeah. And so what I think is happening is that these phenomena manifest from time to time to basically soften and allow reality to become slightly malleable again. And so,
from where do they manifest? How do they manifest? On our minds alone?
oh no, I mean, I would say, I mean, I can't say the fact of that, but I think that you will believe that it was an absolute physical object within reality, and that's the point of the interaction, is to change the reality that you're participating in to create potential for new things to happen in the world. And so, I think McKenna said this one time, was that, if you wanted to change, you just need one miracle. Like if the world witnessed one miracle, then anything would become possible again, because it would fly in the face of everything that we believe about reality. And so I think that that's what the UFO serves as, is it is an aspect of the divine. It is a thing, a transcendent thing that comes into a rigid reality and temporarily changes the rules of that from above. And when people witness that, then they have crazy ideas. they get there's, when you look at a lot of the contactees, the stories that they come up with is they're like, oh, you got to get rid of the nukes, and we got to have world peace, and you got to take care of everybody. There are these uniting messages that come out of it, which are thoughts that have kind of been poo-pooed for like a very long time.
Have you guys heard of that? There should be footage of it on YouTube. We might be able to find it. It's either Israel or Tehran or is it? I forgot which city it was, whether it was in Israel or another country. But there was a UFO that was right above a government or church building, large church building. And everyone was like, holy crap, what is that? And they all watched it. And this craft or energy ball looking thing, saucer shaped, it hovered right in the middle, right on top of the building. Hovered. And there's many angles, actually, which people took the video and then uploaded it.
Yeah.
And then after I don't know, don't quote me on this, but after approximately 20 minutes, did you find it? Yeah. It just shoots up and disappears.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most recent footages that we have of a mass.
Wow.
Where many people from many angles experience this thing. Now, this Skeptics magazine and other people have they've attributed this to a naturally occurring electricity ball.
What?
Yeah, so they say that sometimes in the Earth's ionosphere, there's these balls of electricity that occur because of just the ionization. Ball lightning, exactly. Yeah. But what's so particularly awkward about this explanation for this thing is that why was it on top of this area? What was attractive electrically about this area for that to occur? And what are the schematics of that area? What are the characteristics of the area?
And more than that, too, even just watching it, and we'll put it on the screen, it seems like it comes down in a controlled fashion.
Yes. And I don't know how an electric ball acts.
It doesn't, right, I don't either, but then when it comes back out,
it's pretty weird.
It also seems, everything seems deliberate about the movement.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, too, is my understanding is that ball lightning is completely not understood in any shape, form, or fashion. And so you say, well, we have this impossible thing that we don't totally understand that we're using to debunk this other thing. Yeah. I mean, there are stories about ball lightning coming down the chimney, passing around an entire room, and then like exiting. I think it was out the window, or maybe it was back out the chimney. But like, ball lightning's a really peculiar thing, and it seems to be this like kind of go-to write-off for these phenomena that happen.
And even somebody like Joe Rogan would say this. Like, I've heard him talk about this, and I agree. Like, there's a proclivity among skeptics. Once you join a particular group of people and you say, well, I'm a skeptic, then the endeavor becomes, well, I must paste my skeptic explanation upon everything,
Yeah.
you know, which I don't think is totally fair either. If you're true skeptic, then what you will do is not jump for the opportunity to be skeptical.
Yeah, well, skepticism has come to be a belief. It's a belief
Right,
that
yeah.
impossible things aren't possible. And so I'm
Yes.
skeptical of impossible things,
Yeah.
which is, it's just a belief that some things are not possible. And that's not skeptic. A skeptic would go, well, maybe things are impossible.
Right.
And so
Yes.
it's just silly.
Or it seems like skeptics, and specifically, I just feel like the best example is Snopes.com. They're always trying to disprove everything.
Right.
Everything is, it's always,
Rather than simply investigate.
rather than investigate, they always have this, they're always bent on disproving anything that goes against the status quo. And, you know, you see that with hardcore atheism a lot.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Evangelical almost to the point of being,
So, you know, regarding aliens as well, and we talked about it in the last podcast, I think, you know, the Gaia Network. Are you familiar with the Gaia Network at all? A lot of great stuff on there. Always plugging it. But there's a book / document entitled The Law of One. Have you heard of The Law of One?
I've heard of it, yeah.
I was reading it a lot last summer. I almost got through all of it, and then somebody who is super, super, super skeptical who's close to me, I'm not going to even name names, he'll listen, basically got me to stop reading it.
Yeah.
And I regret that. But in that book, basically the premise is that it's in the 70s, two guys and this woman are channeling an entity. So the woman in this book, she's laying down, and every day they put her in a very ceremonial type thing, and she channels an entity entitled Ra.
Mm-hmm.
And even the setup of her body and the degree is important for her to channel this entity properly. And, and you know, that's not random either. They didn't just make that up. That's a common thing, kind of in a magic mysticism sense. And, you know, Ra talks about all sorts of things, talks about other beings in the galaxy, other beings in the solar system, talks about councils. And there's so many different types of extraterrestrials that it's just a normal thing. And one crazy example that I love from this book is so when she's channeling, the men who are with her, they're just asking Ra questions. And I find that it's pretty hard to discredit, because her responses, and they have the recordings of it too, but her responses are so specific and deliberate. I don't understand how it could be faked. Maybe it could be. It could be. Who cares? But
do you mean the power with which she says things seems to be so deliberate?
Yeah, the voice of Ra, the syntax of Ra is different, completely different from her syntax, and it's uniform throughout, which makes me believe that it's not actually her speaking.
Right.
Of course, I take that with a grain of salt, as should everybody else. But just a little quick, cool anecdote. They got to the point where they're asking, how are the pyramids built? Because if you do any sort of research about how the pyramids were built, we don't have the answer. And any answer that we do have is inadequate. And so what Ra said, and by the way, this is not actually connected to Ra of Egypt at all.
Okay.
This is just a extraterrestrial, transcendent being that is part of us. We're also Ra in some sense, as they state.
Okay.
And they say that the people back then were so connected to the earth and connected to each other, sort of like how we were talking about earlier, that they're able to connect with the energy inside the earth and move the blocks with the power of their mind / consciousness. And actually, when I read that, I was like, wow, I'm on board with that.
Okay.
It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
That's more of a digression though about the book. So,
well,
and then you can listen to other people, and we talked about sinister endings earlier, sinister conclusions to our reality. And if you go really, really deep on some weird alien conspiracy stuff, you have things that are sinister, such as like a 20 and back program where,
Yeah.
you know, where we have legitimate people, a community of people remembering, and like your tattoo says, remember on your hand, remember these things that are within you, these past memories that you've experienced, because you have all of it within your consciousness, no matter where you are. You just have to remember it. And people will remember something called a 20 and back, and that's essentially where you're a slave on another planet, and they take your consciousness, put it into a different body. You work for 20 years, and you come back and you wake up and it was just a dream. But through hypnosis or through traumatic experience or something like that, you might actually bring these memories back to light, and you'll be like, what the heck just happened? And so there's so much conflicting information is kind of what I'm getting at, that again, you do not know what to believe. And if you're making any conclusions, if you're walking around and you're like, this is fake, this is not real, just shut up.
Yeah, and what I feel like also, like, on a certain level, is it like it's all sort of real. Like, it might not fit with like consensus reality, but like it's these things happen.
What is real? If it's real for you, what is even real?
Yeah.
But then also, if you go down that path, then you can go down the path of what is moral, and if it's moral to you, then. And that's a
the danger in that, you could say, is just the danger of justifying really wacky, destructive things.
Yes.
Or even nihilism, which discussed in the very beginning, can be justified through that lens, or even like some of the cults, like we were talking about cults, like the cult that the guy convinced everybody to poison themselves and die. It's like, was that a real thing? Was that a true thing? Was that a good thing for him to do? You know, because they were seeking the unknown, or they were so faithful of in the unknown that they would all take each other's lives. You know, so at that level, there are definitely like inherent dangers of like running with the idea that, well, this is my truth, etc. But to be fair, in that scenario, you could pretty much tell that the guy was a piece of crap.
Well, yeah, and like I think the other thing too is, like, you think about it, right? Is it like if you exist if you exist as an entity and you can just be, right? Like, why would you change anything? Like, you clearly have, if you're just being, then anything that deviates from being or an attempt to do anything other than just be, I think, is playing into a personal deficit. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, if you start doing any of that stuff, it's you're trying, and the point is it like simmer down all this trying, just be
non-attachment.
I agree with that. You know, that's funny, because in music, you can't really try, but what you have to practice to gain the physical skills. But then once you do that, you can't try anymore. Which is why, I don't know, I think that you might find it interesting. Like, for example, in jazz music, you can't try to improvise.
Yeah.
You have to let your being and your inner self, your knowledge that you have attained, but also that's always been in you, to come out in that creative outlet. And that particular medium, that particular creative outlet is so difficult to grasp, because it doesn't have a form, but it is the primordial truth that you tap into. I don't know.
No, it makes total sense to me. Cool stuff. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like art and a lot of things. Is that you just get in you're just being, you know, and you're just do the thing, and it's perfect. I think that's perfect. Pretty good for our podcast.
This was perfect.
I think so. I'm very happy with it. I'm very excited about the topics we talked about.
Yeah. So with that, Clint Jurek, thanks, man, for coming on. That was super cool. Yep. This is all synchronicity. Everything is as it should be.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be weird, and I apologize if I didn't make any sense sometimes.
No.
I can't hang on.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. We're all sweating.
Yeah.
We're all drenched right now. I don't know.
Trying to keep the AC quiet.
Trying to
Alright,
keep the AC
we are
on.
the Houston Ensemble. Thanks again for sticking through with us. Follow us on all socials at Houston Ensemble. Leave us your thoughts and comments. Subscribe. Hit that bell notification because we're going deep here every podcast. We're going deeper than Joe Rogan. Okay?
Deeper than Joe.
So don't miss out. And we'll see you guys next time. On 3, 1, 2,